Cavalese's tranquility was abruptly shattered. The Italian resort turned from a skier's paradise into a scene of carnage within seconds. The cable car was crushed after falling 300 feet. For those inside, there was no hope of survival. The drop was just too great. The car was going up the mountain when the cable carrying it was severed by an American military jet. The Grumman Prowler, the type used for reconnaissance in Bosnia, was apparently on a training mission at the time.
All that we have right now is that a Marine Corps aircraft that is temporarily assigned to Aviano Air Base struck some object today, sustaining minor damage to the aircraft. We had no one on the aircraft injured.
A second cable car was coming down the mountain when the accident occurred. Amongst the dead were Germans, Hungarians and Poles. The resort is popular with foreign tourists, but there are no reports of any British casualties. Cavalese is no stranger to tragedy. In 1976, 42 people were killed in another cable car accident. Then technical error was to blame. A short while ago, we flew over the valley where today's collision occurred. Even cloaked in darkness, it was possible to make out the mountains and the lights of villages. In broad daylight, it should have been more than possible to see the cable car from any aircraft. Both the civilian authorities and the American military have tonight promised a swift inquiry. It'll focus on just why the plane was flying so low in an area marked on every map as a ski resort. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, in the Italian Dolomites.
The Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, is to visit Kuwait and Saudi Arabia tomorrow for talks on the Iraq crisis. The American Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, ended her Middle East tour today, but failed to win more than token backing for renewed military action against Saddam Hussein. The 9 o'clock news special correspondent Ben Brown has been to Bahrain to gauge Arab reaction to the current standoff.
The energy of America's diplomats is focused now not so much on avoiding a military attack on Iraq as on winning international support for one. But here in Bahrain, Madeleine Albright got only qualified backing, while another key Gulf state, Saudi Arabia, still won't allow American airstrikes to be launched from its territory. The Arab world is hesitant, to say the least, in its support for America, but Mrs. Albright claims it's enough.
I have had I think, very positive support, whether it's from King Hussein or from the Emir here or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, for what we are seeking. And I think that we believe that we will have all the cooperation we need across the board.
Like other Gulf states, Bahrain is loyal to America, but Muslims here accuse it of double standards for being tough on Iraq and soft on Israel, which they say is allowed to drag its feet on the Middle East peace process. And yet, while Arab states may be reluctant to give public endorsement to a new military campaign, in private, behind the scenes, they are much more supportive. Because in the end, they still see Saddam as a dangerous neighbor, and they know they need the United States to hold him at bay. However, of the big five powers of the United Nations, America is only getting unequivocal support from Britain for military action. China strongly opposes it and is even against the threat of force. Russia, anxious about lucrative trade deals with Iraq, is also against air and cruise missile strikes. While France is lukewarm at best, and like Russia, it sent a peace envoy to Baghdad. Bertrand Dufourcq set off for Iraq reportedly with concrete proposals for a solution. French and Russian peace missions to Baghdad are running in tandem, and Moscow is still optimistic.
We are in the business of hard negotiations with the Iraqis, and we feel that there is a very substantive support in the international community for this particular line of action, and we hope that eventually this will bring about positive results.
But soon the momentum towards a military rather than a diplomatic solution may become unstoppable. Ben Brown, BBC News, Bahrain.
In Iraq, many civilians fear that their country may be bombed again. Many towns and cities were badly damaged in the air raids in 1991 and are still being rebuilt. As George Alagaya reports from Baghdad, Iraq is still struggling to cope with the aftermath of the Gulf War.
The market in Baghdad's Midan Square sells anything and everything. From nuts and bolts to clothing, it's all second-hand. There used to be one market like this in Baghdad. Now they're everywhere. Sanctions are biting, money is scarce. Basim Shia Ajil lost his job. The family has had to sell off household goods like their fridge and TV.
In the past, the shops were full, but now life is very difficult. Even a toy like this costs more than people earn in 1 month. That's why I buy an old one.
The Gulf War has turned Iraq into a nation of dependence. This mill produces 900 sacks of flour a day, all of it destined for the nationwide ration system that's been in place since 1990. Even so, the United Nations says at least 500,000 people have died from malnutrition in the last 7 years. Sausan Abdul Latif and her son lived through the bombing of Baghdad in 1991. Every small-scale model in this museum dedicated to the war is a reminder of those days when the city reverberated with the thunderous sounds of battle. Radio stations, conference centres and bridges, they were all targets. As building after building was pounded into rubble, fear ran through this city.
Our sons and daughters were very scared then, and we tried to quieten them. If it happens again, we can't comfort them because they know how terrible it is.
This afternoon I went to the Amaria shelter, seen by many Iraqis as a symbol of America's ill intentions. On the 13th of February 1991, the shelter took a direct hit from a missile. Over 400 people, many of them women and children, died. Only 14 survived. Today, the shelter has become a place of pilgrimage. To the people who come here, every death was an act of martyrdom, victims of a Western conspiracy. At the time, America claimed the shelter concealed military equipment. That's never been proved beyond doubt. This group of visitors were all foreigners from the region.
The victims of Amaria, the children who died here, were not just Iraqis. They were the children of all Arabs. Any patriotic Arab must know that. There was no military target here. It was an attack on the Arab nation.
This is what the Americans used to call collateral damage, a somewhat clinical term that neatly avoids any mention of people. It's a chilling reminder that while international anger is aimed at President Saddam Hussein, it's his people that so often suffer the consequences. George Alagaya, BBC News, Baghdad.
The Chief Inspector of Schools in England, Chris Woodhead, has said standards are improving overall, but too many pupils are being failed by their teachers. In his annual report, he warned against complacency, saying the quality of education was still too variable.
Let's ask Abby to do this one for me.
This school's inspectorate video shows model lessons. They're highly structured and devoted to a single subject. The teacher spends most of the time addressing the whole class altogether. Today's report says more primary schools are now doing this, instead of teaching several subjects at once through broad topics which attempt to cover different parts of the curriculum all at once.
There is a move away from traditional topic work, where children, for example, study autumn or food or transport, and the aim is to integrate every subject into that topic. We're now seeing more separate subject teaching, and we think that that is a good thing and is one of the explanations for improved standards in primary education.
Mr. Woodhead and his senior inspectors found that overall only around 12% of lessons were unsatisfactory or poor, compared to around 30% a few years ago. But they say 1 in 10 schools is underachieving, and the gap between the best and worst is too wide. This annual report, distilled from 7,000 school inspections, says there's been a culture change, with a recognition that factors like social deprivation are no excuse for low standards. It praises the increased use of specialist teachers in primary schools and the growing tendency to put children in ability groups. But big challenges remain, above all improving children's basic skills and addressing the relative underachievement of boys. This is the most upbeat report for many years, but the Chief Inspector's crusade isn't over. He says low expectations and complacency in many schools means that for too many children, education remains a lottery. Mike Baker, BBC News, at the Office for Standards in Education.
2 10-year-old boys have been cleared of raping a 9-year-old girl at their school in West London. After questioning some evidence, a judge at the Old Bailey directed the jury to return not guilty verdicts. The 2 boys and a third, who's 11, still face charges of indecent assault. On the judge's direction, a 4th boy was acquitted of indecent assault. The high street catalogue retailer Argos has rejected a £1.6 billion takeover bid from an American mail-order company. Argos condemned the move by Great Universal Stores as opportunistic. Britain's oldest hospital has been saved. St Bartholomew's in London had been due to close under proposals put forward by the Conservative government. But now it's to have a future as a specialist centre for patients with cancer and heart disease. White farmers in South Africa say they're being forced to carry arms for self-defence because politicians are inciting blacks to murder. Racial tensions in rural areas have increased recently after a spate of killings on white-owned farms.
It is difficult to grasp the terror felt by Arnel Boonzaya on the day her husband was shot dead. So this is where the car drew up?
Yeah.
6 weeks ago, the couple came back from church to find the killers hiding behind their door.
And I opened it. And the moment I opened it, 3 of them, of the 4, were standing right here. And he pointed the gun. Nico told me to run. And he drove right round the garage. And they shot him.
Mrs. Boonzaya's view is that this was not a robbery that went wrong.
They had the chairs in a semicircle so they could watch the road.
That is puzzling.
Yeah. So they didn't just want to steal. They wanted to kill.
White farmers believe they are being picked off by extremists in the black community, and they are wary. Last November alone, 13 were killed in South Africa. And here in Schweizerenica, Tielman Nieuwvoet goes through this routine every time he arrives home now, leaving his wife and children waiting at the gate in case someone is waiting for them inside. In his mind, politicians have incited the murders.
There's something political in it, because you've got the politicians shouting from every platform, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, 1 bullet, 1 settler, and that sort of slogans.
The fact that those slogans have actually not been heard for years simply underlines the level of distrust. While the government promises action, farmers take their own, building electric fences. They're not sure who will be killed next, or when, or why. This looks more like a craze than a conspiracy. It's almost as if those responsible have a point to make and they feel murder makes that point more effectively than robbery can. But whatever is behind the killings, they are driving white and black South Africans further apart in a country which desperately needs to bring its barriers down. In a township 30 miles away, the mother of one of the suspects in the Boonzaya killing has a small shop. Her son, who's on remand, is just 16. She is as baffled and desperate as anyone.
I've never experienced any difficulty in connection with the boy. So I was also puzzled. I don't know what happened. And then I can't believe what was taking place. Presently, up to now, I'm still shocked about what happened.
Black residents are furious about patrols and roadblocks being organised by the farmers, which they say are extremely threatening. The farmers claim they have every right to behave like this, even though their black neighbours warn they're now arming themselves. It would not take much more than a spark to ignite these towns. Jeremy Vine, BBC News, South Africa.